shining word-filled shine. Praise him for bits of overtime. Praise him whose wars we love to fight. Praise him, fat leech and parasite. Amen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of the Bougie Horror Podcast Show. I am your host, Ellie Zara, along with my friend Luke St. Peter. And this episode, we are going to talk about the yellow wallpaper. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, Ellie, I'm looking at the runtime. There's no way that you spent that long on a short story. You're absolutely correct. We did not. Instead, what we decided to do was we looked at a short story. I looked at a short student film, as well as a couple of critical analysis of it and the Wikipedia page. And my cohort here, my co-host, Luke St. Peter, had the unenviable task, I don't know, well, jury's still out, of watching the BBC version, which is quite a bit longer than the student film that I watched. So to make up for it, I did a little bit of extra reading and extra watching. But yeah, Luke, how the hell are you?
Oh, I'm doing pretty well. I'm actually glad I watched the BBC version because it said some light on a couple of my confusions with the story.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So
So before we get into the story itself, I think it's important to talk about the author and talk about the background of the story, because that's something that some people kind of leave out. So the story is written by a feminist and author named Charlotte Perkins Gilman. She's not known for a lot. This is really her main claim to fame. It's basically, a lot of people don't know this, and I didn't know it either, but it's semi-autobiographical. So she herself was given the rest treatment recommended to her by this doctor who she basically calls out, if you notice, Luke.
Yes, I did notice that.
Yeah, so this was basically like the mid 19th century version of a call out on somebody. But basically what ends up happening is that she almost went insane, and then she decided to stop doing the rest treatment. The rest treatment ended up being, I mean, it is kind of what it sounds like, just lots and lots of rest, being by yourself, not socializing, not working, not getting back to normal reality. Instead, you're, stuck in one area. Maybe you're getting a lot of fresh air. Maybe you're doing exercise. You're having a lot of tonics, quote unquote. I mean, for the fucking time they were in, I mean, that could have been unleaded gasoline and ethanol for all I fucking know. So, not great, not something that really worked, and was very much pushed up against by a lot of people, including Perkins. I do want to make a couple notes by Gilman, I should say. Perkins, her middle name. I should say a couple things about Gilman. She was a feminist, duh. If you know anything about the story, you know she was a feminist. She's a suffragist as well, campaigned for women's rights. Unfortunately, she was also a eugenicist and was not great on racial issues. I mean, given the time she's in, that's not super surprising. And honestly, for the time she was in, there are people who are a lot worse than she was. But yeah, she has some not great quotes about keeping the Anglo-Saxon nation pure and all that bullshit. Obviously not great, but her feminism was pretty cool. And she even said that tomboys were basically the ideal human being, basically rejecting gender roles and rejecting gender divisions. She thought that there should be no divisions at all between genders, that boys and girls should be raised pretty much the same and have pretty much access to the same kind of toys and activities, which is incredibly progressive for, she was born in 1860 and died in 1935. So an incredibly progressive opinion for her time. So yeah, a little bit of a mixed bag, but yeah. Luke, did you know anything about Charlotte Gilman before we read this book?
No, I did not. I mean, I picked it because I read a brief synopsis on it, and I knew it had leftist tendencies, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to do this work. And I felt that using the story as an episode for the podcast would give me a reason to find out more.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a great story. I had actually read it prior. It's a great little short story. I mean, it's not happy, but it's really well done. I love it. We'll talk about it, but it's a classic for a reason. It's also a feminist horror, which I feel is great, to go from a book that's all about the intersections between racism and horror and now feminism and horror. I mean, I think that's a really good kind of through line to show that horror can talk about all kinds of things that matter for people who are interested in social justice. Anyway, enough preamble. Problematic stuff aside, this is a great story, and I would recommend it to anybody. It's not very long at all. I read it on this website called owleyes.com, which actually it has a bunch of little citations and not citations, but like little bits of notations over certain things. So the yellow wallpaper, as it's called, is about this woman who is stuck in this lavish mansion. Now, everybody hold your booze, but she is basically going insane. It's not really stated explicitly, and I didn't pick up on this until I watched the Crash Course with Hank Green, or John Green. She's dealing with postpartum depression. And I mean, again, if you look at the timeline that she's dealing with here, mental health was not dealt with very well back then, right? If you had too
Yeah.
many nervous fits, you were basically thrown in the mental institution. Go ahead, Luke.
I picked up that she could have had a mental illness, or it could have been something supernatural. And I felt that actually this story drew pointed out the gray area in horror fiction really well. That sometimes it's, if you believe in the supernatural, sometimes it's hard to differentiate between the supernatural and mental illness, which I think
Absolutely.
added to the impact of the story.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's been a big theme in the last 10 years in horror films, especially. Like I'm thinking about The Babadook in particular, which is an excellent horror film, but just a lot of explorations of grief and mental health and depression. I always love that kind of stuff, linking it back to the real world so that people can kind of empathize more with the people who are going through that. So a lot of this story is actually about mental health and about postpartum depression and possibly postpartum psychosis. She's seeing stuff. I mean, obviously it's a story, so that stuff could be real, right?
Right.
It's in her head, but it might not be in her head, right? That's the whole unreliable narrator kind of trope, which I enjoy here. I think it's done
Yeah.
very well. In general, she is going back to the plot. She is dealing with a unspecified bout of, they call it back then the nerves, and women were so medicalized back then. I mean, they still are to a certain extent, right? I mean, I still
Hmm.
remember when, and I am no defender of this woman, but when Hillary Clinton was going for president, people would be like, "Oh, what if she hits her period and she hits the nuke button?" You know what I mean? Like bullshit like that, right? So
Yeah.
we still have vestiges of that bullshit. But I mean, back then, obviously, it was way worse, right? And
Yeah.
so, any kind of psychotic break or mood issue that a woman might be dealt with or might be dealing with would be called, a bad case of the nerves or their fancies. Men love that word. She's staying in this place that she and her husband are renting, and her husband's sister is there too for some weird reason. And I think it's just to have another woman in the story who kind
Well,
of backs up the male oppression. But
she's also there to help
oh,
raise the
that's right. She's
baby
also
during
there
her.
to help take care of her. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Well pointed. So basically, this is like gaslighting the short story in a way. I mean, I saw a comment on the YouTube channel that was like something to the effect of there's enough gaslight in here to light up a whole city or something like that. If you love gaslighting, this is the short story for you, really. She is constantly belittled by her husband, John. One of the
uh,
earliest quotes that I noted, besides she noted that the mansion was queer. And by the way,
um,
I should note it's June, so happy Pride to everybody listening.
right. Oh, I do want to point out that she was put into the house's nursery, which kind
Right.
of reinforces the fact that she's infantilized throughout the whole story.
Right, that's a good point. I didn't even think. What I was thinking is I was thinking about when she said that stuff. The barred windows is what I noticed the most, that she's imprisoned, right? But that's
Right.
absolutely right that she's also being infantilized, and that's why she's in prison, because she's not. I mean, her husband at one point literally says, "Little girl, where are you going?" And it's
Right.
like, bro, who talks to their wife like that? Like little girl? Like she's as old as, well, I hopefully around the same age as you. So
Right.
that was nuts to me. I was like, little girl, who are you talking? One of the first things I noted is that she says that John laughs at her about her, fancies, her nerves, all that kind of stuff. Basically,
Yeah.
all of women's, mental health issues were put down to hysteria. And even hysteria comes from, I believe, the Greek goddess. or one of the Greek goddesses. I can't quite remember the etymology behind it. But hysteria has always been associated more with women than with men, right? You've never heard like someone say, "Oh, that man is acting hysterical," right? You almost
Right.
never hear that. You almost always hear that in relation to women. Yeah, she says that it's expected that John will laugh at her, and I mean, isn't that just fucking sad, right? It's just a small line, but it's
Yeah.
right at the beginning, and she's like, John laughs at me, but it's to be expected out of marriage, and I'm like, Jesus
Yeah.
Christ,
Oh, okay, so I went to adamonline.com to look up the etymology of hysteria.
yeah,
Says nervous disease coined in 1801 from medical Latin as an abstract noun from Greek hystera, meaning womb. And the ia ending, a general sense of unhealthy emotion or excitement. So it basically means, the unhealthy emotional state of a person bearing a womb.
right, yeah. For some reason, I remembered it tying back to Greek gods, but I could have just, I could have been just thinking about a goddess that had, like, I could have been thinking about Hippolyta for all I fucking know. But
Right.
anyway, it's not super important. The main thing here is that it's always been associated with women, like Luke just pointed out. But anyway, that'll teach me to get all high and mighty and academic. But regardless, so her husband is a doctor and he's constantly putting her down and just saying that she's hysterical or it's her nerves or she's always getting better. And one of the things she says, she's basically writing in a journal, even though she's not
Yeah.
supposed to, right? That's one of the other things. He's always putting down what one cannot see. But although that might sound nice to some people, right? That means that you put down things like feelings and psychology and mental health. And I like the note that John Green gave, which is like, even for his time, he's a pretty harsh, rationalist doctor type. But she's obvious.
Mm.
Perkins is obviously Gilman is obviously she's got like four fucking names, but Gilman is obviously trying to show that rationalism has its limits through an extreme example of somebody who doesn't even recognize emotions, right? Or basically, demeans them at every turn.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like when Stephen Colbert had his own show and he went to extremes portraying a conservative, and it was really to
Yes,
prove a point. It's kind of the same line there, I think.
absolutely. Yeah, it's parody more or less. Yeah, I loved Stephen Colbert as a kid, so I totally get what you mean. It's crazy to think too. I was going through this short story, and I was like, even 100 years ago, like 1925 or whatever, like medicine was fucking dire in like a lot of ways. Like we're just like it's wild the amount of advantages and progressions we've made over the last 100 years. I think this is even more than 100 years, set more than 100 years ago, right? Because she died in
Yeah.
1935. But even going past that, I mean, it's just like medicine has come so far from just thinking everything's hysteria. Now, there are still, of course, doctors who have, shitty belief systems about people people with chronic pain deal with this shit all the time, right? They come in, they say, I don't know
Yeah.
what's causing my pain. And the doctor's like, well, give it a couple weeks, rest, drink some water, and you'll be fine. Maybe take a painkiller or something. Yeah, but there's also
Yeah.
the doctors who are like, oh, your chakras are misaligned. I don't know how these fucking people get jobs,
Right.
but yeah.
Kind of reminds me of my mom who went from doctor to doctor telling them her symptoms. And the one doctor in particular remembers saying to her that my mom had hypochondria. And then, like a few weeks later, my mom was in the hospital because she had severe anemia. Because the doctor was like, I think you got hypochondria, but I'll run these labs anyway. And then when the lab results came out, she got a call from the hospital. It was like, you need to be at the hospital yesterday. And so that kind of stuff is definitely still going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not as pronounced, maybe it's not, and definitely not as common, but yeah, it absolutely still happens. And yeah, it's really frustrating, and it's something that not just people with chronic pain, but women in general deal with, unfortunately, especially around childbearing kind of conversations, right? I've heard stories of women saying that they had to go to like five different doctors to get the procedure to have their tubes tied or whatever, so they'd never get pregnant, and
Right.
just doctors telling them over and over again, this is permanent, this is permanent, you can't go back, you can't go back, are you sure, are you sure, are you sure, and just women basically having to plead like, I don't want to have children, like for whatever reason, right? It doesn't matter what the reason.
The thing with my opinion on that is that it could be for any reason or it could be for no reason at all. It shouldn't matter. If you want a procedure like that, you should be able to get one.
Absolutely, yeah. It should be completely non-controversial. One of the earlier lines in the short story, continuing on, I'm kind of going chronologically, so if you have anything to kind of chime in, let me know. But
Sure.
she says that she is coming off as unreasonably angry. And I had the thought in my head that like her anger would never be considered reasonable. Like even now, like there's these memes of like feminists getting like really angry and stuff that's been around for like decades, all
Right.
because like men can't handle women getting mad.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Those kinds of situations might not be as severe or as common on the whole as they used to be, but it still definitely happens.
Right. It's definitely still an issue. Another quote that struck me, he is very careful and loving and hardly lets me stir without special direction. So this is the kind of person, he doesn't love her because he loves her for her. He loves
Yeah.
her because he can control her, because he
Yeah.
can give her, I know this is obvious shit, right? But I think it's worth pointing out anyway because it's a central theme of the fucking, short story. She can't move without him giving some
Right.
kind of reprimand to her, and it can't be downstairs. It has to be upstairs. It can't be near the garden. It's got to be in the nursery room. And if somebody's dealing with postpartum depression, I presume the last place you want to be is in the nursery room.
Yeah, for sure. And then on that token, though, she did say, the narrator did say that she was glad that the baby wasn't in the nursery because then
Right.
she wouldn't have to deal with the horrid wallpaper.
Right. We
Um,
haven't even touched the wallpaper yet, nor should we. It's horrible. I've seen it. The wallpaper is, I mean, there's lots of different metaphors you can get out of this. One of the ones I liked is that John Green talked about like that there's a wallpaper in everybody's life in terms of like some kind of big mental barrier or thing that's causing them to go crazy, like, metaphorically, so to speak,
right,
is causing like huge problems in their life, and is something that they need to overcome. I liked the metaphor that the yellow wallpaper is basically a symbol for the patriarchy. All these
right.
women behind it are basically being encased by this garish yellow wallpaper that everyone's saying is not a big deal, but when you look at it, is like, what the fuck are we doing? But yeah, Luke, did any particular metaphors for the yellow wallpaper itself like really stick out to you, or any of the lines about it?
What I find interesting is that the color yellow was chosen for the nursery
Hmm.
because in that era, that obviously they didn't have ultrasounds, so they wouldn't. So whoever built the house with the nursery wouldn't have known probably what gender the newborn infant would be. And so when you don't know the gender or aren't hoping for a particular gender, then you're generally going to go with the yellows and greens. And so I found it interesting that a gender neutral color in reference to infants was chosen because then it kind of shows that it shows that both genders, I mean, yes, it's primarily going to harm women, but both genders are played on both sides of the oppression. And obviously, with it being a feminist short story, it's going to emphasize how it affects women.
Of course.
But I think choosing a gender neutral color also indirectly points out that it can affect more than just women as well.
For sure. Yeah, gender discrimination doesn't just harm the person who's being discriminated against, right?
Yeah,
There are genuinely good men out there who actually want to like be nice to other people, right? They want to hold doors or they want to do this or that. But now like it's fucking weird to hold the door for like people in sometimes in some contexts, right? Because
right.
like you don't want like women to think you're just doing that because you want to get with them or whatever, or some people take offense or whatever. Like maybe there's different ways of holding a door for somebody too. Like you can do it in kind of patronizing ways. All this fucking dialogue about a goddamn door just because of stupid gender rules, right?
Right.
um but anyway, it affects both people, even if it mostly affects women in a lot of ways. But yeah, last point I'll make on this, but the whole thing about like women being hysterical and their nerves and all the stuff about fancies and their emotions. All of this kind of centralizes the ideas of the human beings who have emotions in our society are largely women, not men, right? So when
Yeah.
men do have emotions, it's seen as not natural, not cool, right? There's all these songs or art about how men shouldn't cry, or men need to be tough and stuff like that, and men crying is isn't good or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's another way. But yeah, I got to the point where she's talking about how he hates to have her write a word, which is another form of control. What really infuriates me about this guy, John, is that he says to her, there's nothing worse than having a person with your fancies get their way or something like that, with your like mental fancies, right? And so
Mm,
basically what he's saying is there's nothing worse for a patient than helping the fucking patient, right? The whole point of your goddamn stupid job as a physician is to be, helping people, right?
right.
Healing people. And he's like, no, we can't give people what they want because if we gave them what they want, maybe then they'd be happy. I'm like, what kind of fucking bullshit is this? And then
Right.
he called her a blessed little goose, and I wanted to slap this man. I'm like, I just want to reach into the store and go, no, 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 no. Like, just stop talking to her like that. That's weird.
And
But yeah,
and the thing is it seems weird to us as 21st century, but with the story being set in the Victorian era, would have seemed relatively normal to
yeah, for
see that
sure.
or hear that.
Again, calling her like just having whims and stuff. Like all of her preferences are whims. They're just whims. They're fancies. They're nerves. They're. He always has these little ways of categorizing, psychoanalyzing. Eventually, all of this dismissal and the yellow wallpaper gets to her. She starts seeing people like creep around and walk around. She can't go anywhere. He won't let her see her cousins. I think her cousins eventually come over there, but she doesn't go and see
Right.
them. And then,
Yeah, and
yeah, go ahead.
I know we're going to get this a little towards the end of the podcast, but I think with all of this controlling behavior that the husband portrays, I think it was kind of rather fitting the what ended up happening to him at the very end of the story, which I actually didn't fully understand what was going on at the end of the story until I watched the movie. And
Mm,
so I would definitely, because of the stream of consciousness that the journal was written in,
yeah.
particularly the end of the story slash movie, it shed a lot of light, I think.
I will say that there are a lot of different interpretations of the end of this, and we'll get to that soon. I wouldn't say one interpretation is necessarily right. There are different ways to see what happens to her by the end of the book and what happens to John.
Yeah,
But like I said, we'll go into that in a second and what we think about the ending and what it means. So John's sister's like the fucking, arguably maybe worse than John because she just backs up
yeah,
whatever he says blindly. I liked what somebody said in the YouTube comments under the Crash Course series where they were like, she kind of represents the women who are enabling oppression but don't realize it, or maybe they do
right.
realize it and
Yeah, I
don't
got
care.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I got that sense too.
yeah, for
Definitely.
sure.
Kind of like how I was hitting on earlier with the gender neutrality of the wallpaper about how both sides, both genders, major genders can reflect both sides of the oppression.
For sure. And then going on from that, so one of the main things that I already talked about is that this book is mostly mostly just like a call out of Silas Ware Mitchell, who was a physician, born in
Yeah,
1829, died in 1914. He is the father of medical neurology and discovered, various diseases, right? His main thing was that he was a proponent of the rest cure, right? The
mm,
rest cure is a medical treatment in which a person lies in bed for most of the time to try to cure an illness. Bed rest refers to voluntarily lying in a bed as a treatment and not being confined to bed because of a health impairment, which physically prevents leaving the bed. The practice is still used, although a 1999 systematic review found no benefits for any of the 17 conditions studied and no proven benefit for any condition at all beyond that imposed by symptoms. So it's just complete bullshit, basically, and doesn't make any sense. So she talks about how the sun is just so. But in the place, so she's talking about the yellow wallpaper. But in the places where it isn't faded and where the sun is just so, I can see a strange, provoking, formless sort of figure that seems to skulk about behind that silly and conspicuous front design. I kind of saw this as like death, like her like seeing death itself.
okay.
Obviously, I don't know if that's accurate, but that was just my interpretation of what was going on there.
I could see where you thought that, but I was seeing more like depression there.
Mm,
Although depression can lead to death,
right,
so I suppose both could be true.
for sure. Yeah, I think it's all about interpretation on that one. This is a very interpretation heavy short story.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Again, going back to that rest method, John says that nothing will cure her except herself. She can only rely on herself, nobody else, no social ties, no community, nothing. It's just will and self control. This is such a stupid idea of what makes up a human because we're not just will and self control, going back to the little girl thing. And then I thought one thing that was interesting about this story in general is about like experts and how much we can trust them and how much we can't. You know, a lot of people, I go back kind of to the Bakunin quote, the Mikhail Bakunin, famous Russian anarchist, who said that in the matter of boots, I trust the bootmaker, right? But what if your
Yeah,
bootmaker is like a flat earther? You know what I mean? Like, what if he's a real dumbass or she, right? Like, what if they're a real dumbass? I think that there are limits to trusting experts, right? I'm not saying don't ever trust experts, right? Because that's not, I just had a doctor's appointment the other day. I'm obviously not saying that. But I
right.
do think trusting experts has its limits. And although it is expertise is the best type of authority, that doesn't mean it's always good, right?
It kind of reminds me of the fact that people sometimes think that memorization of facts is the only thing that contributes to intelligence. And
Right.
really, based on my lived experience, I don't have the formal quote unquote knowledge to back this up. But based on what I've observed throughout life, I would say that really intelligence comes in three parts: memorization, comprehension, and cognition, right? So a person may have been able to get a medical degree or an engineering degree or whatever else through memorization of facts, but that doesn't mean they comprehended what they learned, and it doesn't mean that they know how to think appropriately about what they've learned.
Right. And to add on to that, as somebody who's going for her teacher certification, right?
Hmm.
Learning is not that simple, right? It is memorization is important, but I would argue it's the least important of the most important things you can do, right? Remembering certain things about a river's width or length is great, but actually going to that river that is nearby in town or something is so much more important. Actually seeing the river through a video if you can't do that, or being able to apply like what does this river mean for the larger ecosystem, right? So applying it to
Yeah.
real life.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of reminds me of it's kind of complicated how he's related, but it's basically my uncle's wife, so my aunt, her brother-in-law, a couple of people in my family call a dumbass with a PhD. Kind of reminds me of that, where he's got all of this formal
I don't
knowledge.
know anyone like that, Luke. I wouldn't know anything about that.
I assume that's sarcasm.
Yes, it is sarcasm. That's me ribbing on myself. Go ahead.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean, as implied by the name, he's got a doctorate degree, but he doesn't know how to apply his knowledge wisely, if that makes
Right.
sense. And
Yeah.
that's really what they're getting at with that behind his back nickname for him.
So let's get into the ending of this book. Basically, the main character here starts going crazy,
Mm.
more or less. And one line I want to highlight before she goes completely bananas is that she says, "I sometimes I think there are a great many women behind, and sometimes only one, and she crawls around fast, and her crawling shakes it all over. Then in the very bright spots, she keeps still, and in the very shady spots, she just takes hold of the bars and shakes them hard." I feel like this was a really good look at how women deal with living in an oppressive society. And some of them shake the bars from the shadows, and some of them don't. That line, that quote really resonated with me. Basically, she gets really possessive about the yellow wallpaper. She thinks that it's hers, that no one else should touch it, and that anybody else who touches it is suspect. And so she starts seeing the woman again, and she locks the door, throws the key into the front under a plantain or something like that. She drags her shoulder across the wall and just destroys as much of the yellow wallpaper as she can. Starts to cause her shoulder to bleed. And she does consider suicide. Basically, John comes into the room and he faints, and the story ends with her saying, "I kept on creeping just the same, but I looked at him over my shoulder. I've got it at last," I said, "in spite of you and Jane, and I pulled off most of the paper, so you can't put me back. Now, why should that man have fainted? But he did, and right across my path by the wall so that I had to creep over him every time. All right. What did you make of this ending?
It kind of shows that the oppressive nature of the patriarchy seems to work in the short run, but in the long run, it negatively affects everybody involved. And in the case of the husband, he fainted, so obviously he was just overwhelmed with the results of his actions. And so there was that for sure. And then I'm not sure what to make of the slithering though.
What I got out of this, I think she's turning into the woman that she sees in the yellow wallpaper because she sees that woman creeping around the estate off and on throughout the story. And
Yeah,
eventually I think by the end of it she turns into her and becomes her, becomes the painted lady in a sense.
yeah, that makes sense. That eventually she becomes the very woman that was entrapped in the walls because she's entrapped herself in her life.
Yeah, for sure. I also think it's worth mentioning that her psychosis causes her to finally see through John. But at the same time, it's like the worst way to reach that conclusion, right? It's
Yeah,
like it's like getting I don't know, this is a horrible metaphor, but it's like getting first in like a shooting contest, but you've done that by killing all of your opponents, right? I don't know why.
right.
That was my first thought. But it's just like you got to where you should get, but you did it in a really not great way. And so she's basically lost her mind, but she has reached the right conclusion that John doesn't really care about her and is just
Right.
saying these things. But unfortunately, she just thinks that because she thinks he wants the wallpaper. He thinks that she and Jane both want the wallpaper. And again, Jane is John's sister, I believe.
So yeah, I think there is definitely something to that for sure. It kind of reminded me of kind of like what you were saying about doing things in the worst way possible. Like there have been times in my life where I've had to go to extreme measures just to get people to listen to the most simple messages. And so, I think that sometimes extreme measures are necessary, but like just like in the story, the extreme measure was used as a last resort. Kind of bears into life too that yes, you're going to have to go to extreme measures sometimes, but you use it as last resort and hopefully you don't lose your mind in the meantime.
Right, for sure. So it's conflicted, right? Some people see this as her. One interpretation I saw online is that she is crawling over him and she's like
Yeah,
above him. And so this is kind of I don't want to call it a victory, but about as close to a victory as a woman could get in that kind of circumstances in,
right.
the 19th century. Or some people say she's just completely submitted to her psychosis. If the story would have gone any longer, she would have been instituted and it wouldn't have been a happy ending for her. I think you could easily do a sequel with her and the not that I'm saying they should, but I'm just saying like you could easily like continue the story and she sees the yellow wallpaper again in the mental hospital. But and as we know, but those back then were not great
Yeah, right. There's a reason that the asylums are common settings for horror movies and stuff
for
because,
sure.
like, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is one prime example. So, yeah, I mean, the real life horrors that go on oftentimes are the best material for fictitious stories.
So that's most of what I think we have to say about the ending. What we're gonna do now is I'm gonna have talk about his experiences with the BBC movie and gonna ask him some questions about it, what he thought about it, what were the biggest differences, and so on. And then we'll go over to my perspective, and we'll do a lot the same for me. So we're still having a conversation, but for the record, since I maybe this hasn't been clear, watched his video and I watched mine, and we didn't watch each other's. So we're each coming at
Right.
this from a different perspective with the movies, which I thought was both of us thought was a more interesting way to go about this than us both watching the same material, since there are multiple adaptations of the Yellow Wallpaper. I
Correct.
picked a student play, not student play, a student production from the 2010s, and then he picked what was it, BBC from the
Yeah, from
90s,
1989.
1989. Hey, I was close.
Yep.
Can't believe I even got that close. But
Right.
yeah, what were some big differences? Were there any big differences you noticed from the BBC version?
Um, yeah, the BBC version went into a lot more detail. So at the beginning, like the first 20 minutes or so of the movie showed her writing into her journal. And so, and like, you could hear her thoughts as she was writing into the journal, so you knew what she was writing in the journal, which I thought was a cool reflection of the short story. What I also noticed is that after the first 15, 20 minutes of the movie, you didn't really see her write in the journal anymore. And then maybe right around halfway, give or take like 10 minutes, the doctor actually took her journal and she's like, I do not permit you to, be reading my journal. And he was just gazing through it, not really reading. And he goes, don't worry, I have no intention of reading it. Besides, I need a magnifying glass. Basically saying she has really small handwriting. Turns out when I was reading some background information on the story, the reason because I kind of picked up on this in the short story itself, but it was really confirmed in watching the BBC movie, which is why I saved it for here, that when the main character stopped writing is when this third person narrator kind of picked up where she left off. Because I noticed that the writing was a little bit different in the story from where the main character stopped writing and the narrator picked it up. So I thought that was an interesting take. One of the lines that I don't remember being in this story, in the short story, but I kind of jumped out at me in the movie was that she was like, "You're not listening to me. I'm going to die of boredom." And she was crying. And, that really kind of hit home what was the meaning that was trying to be conveyed in the story, that she was not only was she suffering from postpartum depression and possibly postpartum psychosis, but she had no way to get her mind off of what was going on in her mind. And really, that was kind of, because sometimes the best way to get through a situation is to take your mind off of it.
Right.
And she wasn't allowed to do that, even though she thought would have been best if she had been able to do that. And I really do agree that sometimes that is the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some great points. I wondered when you were watching that, did you feel like the movie was drawn out at all, or did you feel like it really fit the format? Like, how long was it? I think when I
It
looked at
was
the video, it said it
it
was
was
like an hour long.
it was an hour and 18 minutes long and some odd seconds. That included the beginning and ending credits as well. So really, the chunk of the movie itself was really like an hour 12. Actually, I do feel like it was drawn out, but not in a bad way. I felt that reading the story and then having certain confusions about the story, and then watching the movie earlier today, it really enlightened some of the confusions that I had and made the story make more sense. So it was drawn out, but not in a bad way.
Gotcha. Love that. What in particular did you feel was really helped by the extra time? Was there any extra insight? Like you said, like it helped you figure out particular parts of the book. What were some particular things that this really helped clarify for you?
The major one was how the story ended, because like I got a sense that she had that the main character had like transformed into something else, but because of the stream of consciousness of the thought, I wasn't really certain what that transformation even looked like. But at the end of the movie, you saw the main character and the woman in the wall become one. That was basically saying that a literary device to show that she finally gave in to her mental illness. And then when the husband came in the room, he actually saw that how she had transformed. And it was that transformation into a completely mentally ill person that caused him to faint. And then it showed how she actually creeped over him and stuff like that. And so I thought that whole transformation scene at the end was really enlightened by the movie.
Great, great. Were there any like big scenes? How did they handle the ending of it? Did you find that it was a little more obvious and just like clearer than what was in the short story? Did you like it? What exactly
Oh,
happened at the end of the story?
okay. So yeah, I actually did like it. It showed her throwing the key out the window. Now, it did change the ending a little bit because in the story, if I remember correctly, the main character had told her husband how to get the key in order to get into the bedroom, and then made clear that she couldn't open the door, that he had to do it. Whereas in the movie, the bed was pushed up against the nursery door, and he ended up like having to break in like a firefighter into the room. So there was a little difference in how it ended because the movie was more drawn out, particularly, and in a couple other scenes as well. Poetic license was taken to tell the story. I think that was more because the reason they took the poetic license was because sometimes it's easier to transmit a certain idea in a different way using a different medium of telling the story. So it wasn't that they were changing the story just to change the story, but rather they were changing the story because they were adapting it to film.
Yeah. All right. Well, anything else you want to comment about the film? Anything else that stuck out to you or something that you wrote down in your notes that you haven't already talked about?
I very much sensed that it had a British style drama slash horror element to it, like in the way that it was told. If all you're used to is American style horrors, and then you watch this movie, like you're going to see differences in how the British tell dramatic stories and tell horror stories. Like you're going to notice that like one of the differences I noticed is that American horror movies and dramas are more likely to use like background music throughout much if not the whole movie, whereas there were plenty of times in the movie where that background music just wasn't there. But I think by only using the music when it was absolutely necessary, it caused the viewer to have less distractions and caused the viewer to be able to concentrate more on what was actually being said and what was going on. So if that's something that isn't your cup of tea, then maybe it might be a touch jarring. But I would say that I enjoyed the movie in a different way than had it been an American production.
Gotcha. All right. Well, for mine, like I said, I watched a student-led production. I believe it was a high school student-led production called it was 1893 Productions. So pretty cool name. And
Right?
then I also watched the Crash Course video on it and read the Wikipedia to get some background on the story. So, Red, any questions you have for me about the short film?
Yeah. Was there anything that stood out that where the short film differed from the written word?
I mean, it felt like a breakneck pace, but at the same time, because it's only 12 minutes, right? Or something
Yeah.
like that. It felt like a breakneck speed, but it also felt like that made every single scene like so important, so much richer with things to look into or stuff to look behind characters or stuff in the background or tones and everything else. And so that really infused like the whole story I felt like with a bit more purpose. It still felt like even in 12 minutes they hit on the biggest scenes, the biggest conversations. I was really impressed with how, especially for a high school production,
Right.
it's not Oscar, they're not winning any Oscars or anything with this, but they did win some awards for it actually.
Nice.
One thing I really liked is that, of course, because it's a audio visual medium now and not just a visual audio video medium, whatever you want to call it, AV, that at one point when they basically transition into the crickets at one point, getting louder and louder and louder, and then they see like suddenly scene change. But I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of it's still the same, right? At one point, the main character says that the window wasn't open before, which kind of
Yeah.
lends to the haunting. But that wasn't, I don't think that was in the original. The scene where they talk about why they can't leave is a little bit different. It's mostly the same. But he's
Yeah.
like, I don't want to end a 3 month rental early and that the carriage couldn't run on the roads or something like that. Like he finds
Right.
all these kinds of excuses, and I think like one or two of them are a little bit different. One thing that John says here that really stood out for me is take care of yourself for my sake. It does not say for her sake, but for my sake. And nobody but yourself can help you, which is something I've already done. Um, I loved how the main character, I don't think we ever get her name, but the main character, the narrator, I should say, she, when she becomes possessed more or less by the yellow wallpaper later on, she starts talking in like this whispered, hushed tones. She's like,
Yeah.
"What are you doing?" Like I can't even really do it, and just like keeps like whisper screaming like on the front steps where the key is. So,
Right.
just a really good performance at the end.
Yeah. Okay. My question is like let's say you had watched this short film without any knowledge of the story. What things would have stood out to you that might not have stood out otherwise? And then the flip side, too, what things didn't stand out to you that otherwise would have?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what's so interesting about that question is there were a lot of people in the comments saying, I'm here for my English class. Like, I'm here because my English teacher wanted us to read about this. There was a lot of college students in there too. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of college students and high school students, they seem to most of them seem to appreciate it, or at least comment on the fact that it was, based on something that they already needed to read.
Yeah.
But I think something that they would have noticed if they had read it. I mean, some of these quotes are just straight up taken from the book, which they should be, right? But
Yeah.
a lot of the atmosphere, the shadow that happens that like moves throughout the garden and the walls and stuff and the yellow wallpaper was really cool. I don't actually know how they did it behind the scenes, but it was, especially for a high school production, was impressive. And I think that's one thing that if you had read it, you might stick out to you. Something that like if you haven't read it might not stick out to you. Just like how they do the ending compared to the other one. It's a lot bloodier. It's a lot bloodier. And
Okay.
they do like a nice job showing her just completely deranged and just moving around, and you really get a sense of kind of a feralness about her.
Okay. Okay, cool. Can you give any examples of the feralness that might not have been present in the written word?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the video element, really. Like when you're able to see her creeping around, she's
Mm-hmm.
like moving around like an animal, basically. And when she's talking about, like, I had to creep over him every time, I kept on creeping just the same, and so on and so forth. She's like kind of crawling around the floor, but she's doing it with like a bit of precision that you might not see otherwise. You just from reading the book, the short story, I should say.
Gotcha. Did you feel the same way as me that there were some things about the story that were quote unquote on the confusing side, but were the short film enlightened those things?
Um, I don't. I think we had different experiences reading it, and I'm not going to say that's for any particular reason, but I think I got most of what I wanted out of this the first time. Although I will say, like, I didn't understand the stuff about the rest doctrine and anything about Gilman's own personal life or anything like that. Like all that stuff I had to look into. But a lot
Gotcha.
of it, I mean, I felt like I understood the general intent. I'm not going to say like, oh, I knew exactly what she was trying to say, but I felt like I got the gist of it. I enjoyed that aspect to me that it felt up to interpretation and ambiguous to an extent, but I generally got what Gilman was going for most of the time. But I don't remember the exact points you made, but I remember earlier like the nursery room, right? When
Yeah.
you said like that's a sign of her being a fan. Look, I didn't pick up on that. That was a great point, but I was more concerned with the literal bars on the window. But yeah, the nursery part was, and the postpartum, I didn't pick up on that either. So not
Yeah.
everything.
I didn't pick up on the postpartum in particular, but I did pick up on the mental illness type of thing. And I was thinking more like something schizo related, like schizoaffective or schizophrenia or something along those lines where you hallucinated. I mean, that is really cool that you were able to. It was basically found out that she was struggling with postpartum depression. And probably the reason I didn't pick up on that was because to the best of my knowledge, I've never been exposed to it. So it just didn't occur to me.
Yeah, yeah, that's totally fair. The other thing I watched was the Crash Course. Crash Course, for people who don't know, was a very popular series done by Hank and John Green, both very big content creators in the 2010s and early 2020s, maybe. And of course, John Green has very successful books as well. So this is Crash Course Lit. Um, I don't have a ton to say about this, but I did like, if you're looking for a good summary of the book after you watch the short, I keep saying the book, but the short story, I really liked that. This is where I figured out that it was postpartum, and also like that the imprisonment was like something that John Green really said that stuck with me was she was going insane trying to retain her perspective like her
Mm.
particular idea of the world and like what was going on there. Basically going insane, trying to keep that in her mind. She's also trying to find meaning. She has suicidal intentions. He relates it to Freud with the return of the repressed. I don't know a lot about Freud, and he didn't explain a ton, and I didn't write it down in my notes, but he also talks about the principles of design for the yellow wallpaper, so architectural stuff, aesthetics, and then of course the feminist stuff where women are trapped in the wallpaper. If you want some other perspectives and ideas about the yellow wallpaper, I do recommend the crash course. It's only like basically 10 minutes. And it's really
Okay.
well done. They all are. I not grew up, but like in the 2010s, like I really enjoyed watching them on a lot of different subjects. And now there's something that easily anybody from a school could recommend.
Nice.
Um, yeah.
Was there anything from the crash course that surprised you? Like really, really surprised you?
Um, I guess bringing up Freud really surprised me. I didn't see that coming. I wasn't really thinking about, id, ego, and superego or anything like that with Freud. But you can often relate things back to stuff that people repress or that people really want to see in their world. So that surprised me quite a bit. The postpartum stuff, of course, I didn't pick up on that, even though they do mention that she's had a kid. But they mention it very briefly. And it's worth pointing out that the child isn't really a part of the story at all, which I feel like says something, but I don't really know what. But I mean, it's such a important part of her mental state, but it's also never in the story at all. Like you never see her take care of the baby because she's
Right.
too sick, right? So,
Yeah, it's true. You never see her take care of the baby, but that's why the husband's sister was there to take care of the
right.
baby. Like I told you, I've never really been exposed to my knowledge to postpartum depression, so I'm not necessarily going to know what that looks like, let alone what to look for. Was there anything in the crash course that you had already picked up on from reading the story, but just kind of reiterated to you, even if it was from a different angle?
Yeah, the women being trapped in the wallpaper. That's something I thought about too while I was reading it. I didn't think about the principles of design because I'm not really into aesthetics or architecture, but
Right.
I was thinking about it from a feminist perspective of seeing the patriarchy as a form of the yellow wallpaper. And the yellow wallpaper being your obstacle isn't something I thought about, but it was another cool thing that I
Okay.
really enjoyed seeing from someone else's point of view, and the rest cure as well, going against that, and just John like just completely dismissing it and using examples of why it didn't work and so on and so forth. So great. Well, I think we about nailed it. I think that's the yellow wallpaper in a nutshell. It's a great feminist horror short story about confinement, imprisonment, and trying to seek liberation through insanity when insanity is the only sane thing to do in an insane world, right?
Yeah.
The only what's that quote? The only sign of a sick society is the people who are deemed healthy and the people who are deemed sick. I don't
Yeah.
remember, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Oh,
So
yeah, for sure.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, Luke, any last comments from you about the yellow wallpaper? I presume you enjoyed it. I mean, you haven't said
Yeah.
explicitly, but I presume it was a good time for you.
I enjoyed it. What I've noticed about reading in general, and I've noticed this with the next book we're going to be doing in episode 4, is that it's actually easier for me to read on the Kindle than it is a paper book. And I think what it is that there's like less text per page, and so there's less attention needed per page. So switching pages causes me to switch my attention. And it's like tricking my brain to read more, right? Like if you have
Right.
to pay attention in shorter spurts, you end up paying attention more. So I did enjoy the short story, even though I found it confusing in a couple places. But I attributed that more to the stream of consciousness style of the journal entry as opposed to about Gilman actually, being a bad writer or anything.
So good stuff all around. I really enjoyed this, and it was a nice switch up from a big, long story that intersects in all sorts of places, like Lovecraft Country did, to go from that to a short story with a bunch of multimedia. In the next episode, we're going to go even more multimedia. We're going to talk about, oh boy, what a change. We're going to talk about Tales from the Hood, which is a 1995 film. We did pick some very silly, schlocky horror stuff as well that might comment on social stuff or just might be like really bad. So we're not just about the social commentary. Sometimes we want to have dumb fun too.
Right.
So, Luke, this has been great. I hope you don't mind, but I really got to go finish up these walls right now. This yellow wallpaper has been staring me down, man. I really got to get it put away. You know what I mean? It's driving me
Right.
crazy.
Right. I feel like there's a song in there somewhere.
Probably. Um, Yeah, I can't wait to creep around in my backyard later tonight and just howl at the moon or whatever she did after. Good for her, good for her. But anyway, that's it for us. I'm Elizara, and that was Luke St. Peter, and that was us on the Yellow Wallpaper. Thanks for joining us. We will see you in the next episode. Happy Pride to everybody. It is June 12th when we are recording, so happy Pride once again. May you visit a queer house, but that does not drive you insane. That would be great.
Talk to you later, guys. Hope you enjoyed the episode.